You're listening to Neurodivergent Mates. Hello and welcome to another episode of Neurodivergent Mates. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined with my main man, Photon John. What's going on, brother?
Yeah, working hard today. Working hard. Nice quiet weekend. How about you?
Oh, another day, another dolly, you know what I mean? Just going through, I don't know, the year's just going so fast.
Yeah, it's that time of year too. Everyone's working real hard.
Well, it's tax time. It's tax time, isn't it?
Yeah.
But cool. Yeah. Anyway, we should get stuck into this. We've got a really awesome guest all the way from the UK. So today what we're going to be covering is success as a dyslexic entrepreneur. And we're joined by our special guest, Jamie Waller. Jamie, how's it going, my friend?
I'm great. Good morning from me and good evening to you guys.
Good evening for us. Yeah. Yes. No, thank you so much. And like we were saying before, here in Australia or in Sydney, at least anyway, the weather has just been absolute crap. And yeah, I think it's just an Australian thing. But it looks like you're really living it up there at the moment.
Yeah, we've probably got about an hour, so hopefully we get done in time, and everybody believes that the UK is like this 364 days a year.
So, do you know what I need to say, right? Like looking out the back there, right? I don't know. It sort of reminds me of like it looks like Thailand or Bali, like the back roofs there or something. I don't know. It's probably just how we're seeing it now, but it probably looks completely different than that.
Well, we're really fortunate actually. Yeah, we're on the river here, so
wow.
In the background, but we're just on the outskirts of London, and it's a beautiful part of town.
Yeah,
so when the weather, we do, and we've just had the Henley Regatta here, so we've had a week. If my voice is a bit hoarse, it's because I've had about 200 gallons of rosé over the last 7 days.
No judgment here, mate. No judgment here. But what we might do before we get started, we'll just do a little bit of a shout out for any new listeners who we might have. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. We're available on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, and you can also subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, too, if you haven't already done so, please check out the work we're doing at Neurodiversity Academy, which you can check out at neurodiversityacademy.com. Also, too, some of the discussions we may have may be triggering. So if you need help, please reach out to a loved one or call emergency services. We are not doctors. This is the space for sharing experiences and strategies. Also, too, if you've got some questions to ask us during the podcast, please feel free to do it through our live platform, which you can just ask while you're going through our social media platforms. Nice. I got that down well pat there. What do you think of that one, Photon, John?
Better and better.
Yeah, hell yeah. Jamie, look, thank you so much for coming on. When you reached out to me to connect, I was just like, at first, whenever I get people connecting with me, I'm always sussing them out. And when I checked out your stuff, I Googled you and Google just blew straight up. So I was like, okay, this guy's real here. So when I reached out to you and I thought, yeah, this would be a really great person to come onto the podcast. So, we're really excited to have you on. But before we do, we've just got someone saying, hi, all new listeners, Caitlin here to be online. Yeah, good. Thank you so much for reaching out. But you know what? I do want to ask one question. And this is one question that I thought that this is the only time I can really ask this one because you're the first person that's come along. So, I saw that on LinkedIn or something. You were selling your Aston Martin. Is that correct?
I have just sold it, actually.
Oh, you've just sold it. Okay.
Got the money this morning.
Oh, great. That's fantastic. I'm curious, right? what's the difference between driving a $200,000 car compared to, say, a brand new $35,000 car? Because I hear people talk about it. I want to hear it straight from someone who does.
It's interesting, right? So obviously, I talk about this all the time about boating. The great thing about boating is everyone can enjoy in the water, right? If you're on a kayak or you're on a £2 million motor yacht, and I guess the same is for driving in reality, right? But the Aston Martin is a car that you jump in and you cannot be distracted. So if you're used to driving and texting or driving and Googling or driving and singing, when you drive one of those things, you're attached to the steering wheel, because if you lose concentration for a while, it will lead to bad results.
I reckon. And did I see something that you were testing out a Ferrari or something like that?
Yes, yeah, I've got the new 4-wheel drive Ferrari on all.
Oh, serious? Oh, nice. That must be comfortable.
Yeah, more comfortable than the camper vans I used to drive around Australia.
I reckon. And we will say that Jamie, before we got on, he was sharing with us that when he used to live in Australia, he actually used to build camper vans for a little while there. So I can definitely, that's a big jump up from a camper van or an old school bus to the brand new 4-wheel drive Ferrari.
It is social mobility in real action.
Yeah, totally. Oh, there you go. You've answered that really well. But I tell you what, it will probably be really great to hear a little bit about yourself, the work that you've done and the work you're actually working towards as well. We'd love to hear about it.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, thank you. So I was born here in London, in East London. I like to say I was born with dyslexia, ADHD, colorblind, and poor. So I really had to work quite hard to make a success of life. I was very, very fortunate. At age 5, my mother, I lived with my mum and dad in a 2-bedroom flat above a shop in East London. And my father was abusive, but my mum was hugely supportive, a big fan of mine, as I was of hers. And age 5, we were at a local fete, a fair, and there were some displays going on there. And there was a motorcycle club. And this motorcycle club was set up solely to help disadvantaged children from inner London city estates, which I was one of. So age 5, I made an application to join that team. And for the next 11 years, I spent every weekend and every school holiday away from home, which was just life-changing for me because, well, one, it got me away from the violence and stuff at home and in East London, but also gave me a real view that there was more to life, because we would jump on a bus every week and go traveling up and down the country to put on displays. And the motorcycle team was a military-led motorcycle display team, so it had a lot of discipline around it and taught me a lot of great leadership skills. But age 11, that team nearly went bankrupt, and we have a large charity here in the UK called the Prince's Trust, which is now just been renamed as the King's Trust. And that the Prince's Trust gave a donation and helped us out. So age 12, I was fortunate to get invited to the palace to thank the Prince of Wales and say thank you for that help, and it enabled the IMPS to continue. But fast forward from that, age 16, I left school without any qualifications. My dyslexia was just too severe to get me through any single form of education. And I went on to starting my own businesses, and I started in window cleaning, then car sales, eventually into outsourced debt recovery. And then since then, I have built and sold businesses for sort of tens of millions of pounds. And I own 13 businesses that trade in the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, and a small part of Europe today. So and then I should just end that story on that. I was very fortunate that 5 years ago, the Prince of Wales invited me back to become chair of the Prince's Trust and set up a new department within the trust called the Enterprise Network. And I've just stepped down from my chair role there. And last year was fortunate enough to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of the King, the Business Champion Award. Wow. So a real full circle of how, in my view, that social mobility can help anyone.
I bet you back in those days when you were struggling in school and all that, you would never have thought you would actually get to that point. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was always fairly self-confident. I always knew that I wouldn't be poor, because growing up poor was tough. So I always knew I didn't want that, and I always knew I would find ways not to be that. But to be completely honest with you, I didn't know if that was going to be crime or business. It was. I definitely wasn't going to be poor, but I didn't know how I was going to do it.
Coming from East London, that's the Cray twins area, correct?
Yeah, Bethnal Green. It's right. That's exactly where they were from. Yeah.
Very, very, and like back in the day, that was very rough. Yeah,
really rough. Say to people in Bethnal Green, you weren't worried about being bullied and being beaten up. You were about being bullied and having your face sliced, because that was a thing in Bethnal Green. They didn't stab you. They wanted to cut your face because they believed if they cut your face, you would have to be reminded of it every day when you saw yourself in the mirror. And so it was a really rough way to grow up as a kid, trying to avoid that sort of action,
Would you have sort of found that maybe having that, like being brought up as, especially now in business, that has, not saying that you need to be like that in business, but like it's really taught you a lot about, resilience, I'm assuming, stuff like that, coming from those types of areas?
Well, it's always difficult to tell, isn't it? Because, I mean, those with dyslexia, people say, well, they become resilient because of their dyslexia anyway. So it could be that I'm dyslexic. It could be because I grew up in Bethnal Green. Actually, the work that I've been doing on my recent book, The Dyslexic Edge, is more around how people are either born exploiters or explorers, and explorers make up roughly 15% of the population, exploiters 85%. And those that are explorers have this thing called dyslexia, which is a learning difference. But if you think about an explorer has to be resilient. An explorer has to continuously go out and search for new things, but also continually pick themselves up when they don't achieve. So I would say that my resilience is probably just a natural gift of birth than any of the other things.
I'm sure we're going to find many things that we all relate on throughout the course of the episode. But the growing up poor, certainly I know for myself, and my mum instilled this in me a lot. We had actually very similar situations growing when we were young. Just that desire to sort of claw your way out of the gutter, I've found to be very, very motivating. And I do wonder sometimes if that helps me get past, well, not past, but deal with ADHD and autism, to better to achieve more than a lot of my friends did growing up who are neurotypical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting, right? And I've just spent the last 2 years, talking to one of the most famous dyslexics on earth, Sir Richard Branson, about his route to success. And then I was fortunate that I have traveled around the world in the last 18 months interviewing other successful dyslexics, ranging from Paul Orfler, who owned a company called Kinko Print, and from $5,000 took it to a $4 billion company. Sir Charles Dunstan here in the UK that did something similar with a company called Carphone Warehouse, and now owns Five Guys, the big burger chain here in the UK and across Europe. And what you definitely see in those neurodiverse individuals is that they do have this knack to continuously drive and continuously push for more. And it's unfortunate in some ways that the statistics that we hear most of are sort of 35% of all entrepreneurs are dyslexic. So are 40% of self-made millionaires, by the way, which is an amazing statistic. But unfortunately, the statistic that we all seem to be happy to brush over, or certainly from the government's point of view, is that so are 50% of all prisoners. And the drive that I have to try and achieve over the next few years is how do you change that?
Yeah, totally. Hey, sorry, just out of, and you're definitely right. And that's something, we're actually very passionate about that area as well. Because it can be, you could either go one way or the other. And I think sometimes, I know a thing for me was back when I was in school, I was told that if I didn't get good marks, I'd never be able to get a good career and all that. And, we know that that's bullshit pretty much, and I think maybe some of these people who do go into crime, for example, maybe if there was some direction earlier, would they have gone that way? Who knows, And just out of curiosity, with some of the the quite successful entrepreneurs that you've met, sometimes when I'm talking with a lot of, neurodivergent business people, I always feel like we've got like this connection. Did you find that when you were speaking with, say, people like Richard Branson, like that you may not have with other people who are maybe neurotypical, for example?
That's a really great question. Well, no one's ever asked me that. But as you were asking me, I got thinking. I thought absolutely, because it's a great leveler up, right? It brings people to a natural level. So when you meet Sir Richard Branson, and some might feel sort of imposter syndrome because they're like, well, what am I going to talk about? How am I going to control this environment? How am I going to get the most from it? When you're sort of opening gambit, or you're opening conversation with him is, hey, I'm also dyslexic and have ADHD, and then all of a sudden you're talking about things on a completely different level. And yes, so my first ever time meeting Richard was on Necker with about 10 other people. We'd been invited there as a small group, and it was very apparent to me that that everybody that got a bit of Richard's time went straight down the same route of business success. Tell me about this, let me tell you about me, etc., etc. And I don't know, but I think the reason that Richard and I got on so well and maintained our relationship since is probably because I was less interested in trying to hear tips from him on how to become a billionaire, but more interested to understand his views on dyslexia and ADHD and its connections to sleep. And I was more curious than some others maybe were, but curious on a subject that he is very famously known for, and one might say has done more certainly for dyslexia than most other people on Earth.
Yeah, the connection is so, like 2 years doing the podcast now, that connection tends to be pretty immediate with everyone we speak to, with the community growing, and everyone's starting to realize, oh, okay, this is okay that I'm like this, and all of the things we're told, particularly in school, not necessarily true, and those systems are not built for us. And then I imagine, especially when you meet someone who's successful, despite all that, it's got to speak to the core a little bit.
Well, the thing is, what I've found is that it's opened a lot of doors for me. Like, I've been able to connect with some really, I haven't connected with Richard Branson yet, but like, I have had some conversations with actually some very big, dyslexic people, and it probably wouldn't have happened if I just had it been like you were saying, when you went to Necker Island and everyone else has just gone straight for the normal type of questions that you go for. The other questions I've approached these other people with were more on that personal level, and they could relate, which I think is quite beneficial for us, especially in business as well.
That's why I love the work that we do, because we get to connect with people like that all the time. It's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I wrote the book, I went out and interviewed these people, and I was going into their homes for between 4 and 8 hours. But there was an instant connection, and there's a beautiful vulnerability that comes from those that talk about their dyslexia or their ADHD or any other neurodiverse symptom, because it takes them back immediately to their childhood. It also takes them back to one of the stages in life where they were most vulnerable. So when you start an interview or discussion on that basis, it brings that openness to talk and explore where the conversation might go. So I went into some people's homes, and we would start off the interview with, well, where were you born? And we would finish on where they are today. But in that 4 to 6 hours, we would cover, in some cases, people's parents' deaths, some serious illness with their children, some times when they had been completely screwed over by competitors or by family members. And there was this real sense of, I'm in a safe environment here because I'm with another person like me. So there's no walls, and I can be free to discuss. Another thing I should say is, when I did the book, I made it clear to every single person, whether it be you're a billionaire or or your very early stages of your success, you were not going to have any editing rights for the book. I was going to come and interview you, and I was going to take that content, and I was going to be as as true to the reader, the person acquiring the content, that I could be, and tell them what you told me in a better
Best
way
way to
than sort
be.
of, you know, yeah. And I was surprised that everybody was willing to do that.
Yeah. We've actually got a question later on where we will touch base on something around that, but it would be actually great because, you know, we do want to hear a little bit about the work you're doing, especially with your book, because, you know, you've just released it. You know, I think this would be a great way to sort of plug it, but like, you know, share it with, because you were actually, I didn't realize when you first connected with me that you actually did the book with a person that I've known actually for a while in the dyslexia space, Dr. Helen Taylor, correct?
Wow.
And
Yeah,
the research that
brilliant.
she's done is just real. It's cool. When I first saw it, and I really wanted to get her down to Australia, but obviously we had a pandemic, we had so many things hit us. Not quite yet, but the goal is to get her down because the research that she's done, especially around, you know, dyslexic or neurodivergent CEOs and entrepreneurs, it's just unbelievable. So please share us a little bit about that experience and a little bit about the book.
We know when I first decided to write the book, I got back from NECA and started to reach out to some academics because I wanted to have so the whole view. The reason for writing the book really is that there's a lot of academics write books on dyslexia. The problem with that is not many dyslexic people read them, because what happens is, I always like to say, dyslexics like to read too, but dyslexic people normally read solely to get the content out, not for the joy of reading. And when academics tend to write these books, they just fill it with so much content that it's not easy to get out. And, you know, we interviewed a chap called Cliff Wiseman, the owner of Speechify, which was originally set up for the dyslexic community for the book. Yeah, and Cliff has a great explanation for this. Cliff says something along the lines of, what's 42,612 divided by 16? Now multiply that by 4, now take away 6. This is what it's like for a dyslexic's brain reading a paragraph like this. And when you understand that, by the way, Cliff was supposed to be chapter 11 for the book, but when he said that opening statement, we moved him straight to chapter 1 because we thought, what a beautiful way to open up this content. But anyway, going back to your question, we wanted to find an academic that understood that it was about storytelling, that it was about case study led content. Otherwise, it was not going to be interesting for the dyslexic mind. And what we found with Helen after speaking to 4 or 5 of them is, you're right, her research is not, I think you said the word cool, which I think it is. I find it so romantic. It's so beautiful, the research she's doing around this.
And the way she puts it is cool. The way she explains it is just like, yes.
Yes,
You know,
and
it's
then
I
went to meet her. I went to meet her and had coffee. And in an hour and a half, I just sat there with my mouth wide open and just thought, wow, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we wanted. So we started work straight away. We started work that afternoon because she was mid-research on other stuff. So we had to try and slot in a lot of, you know, little bits of free time to get this book done. But we worked together for over 12 months on the book. And I'm continuing to support her activities now to ensure that she can take some of this research and put it into real, some real studies to see if we can prove out some of these proof points even more. But she was just wonderful to work with. And what Helen does is she opens up the book, but also every person we feature in the books, there's 14 chapters, each of them a different successful dyslexic person. At the end of their chapter, she gives you her insights to what's typical about their life story with those with dyslexia. And it's really great. It's great to have that valuable content throughout, you know, run itself right through the book.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I've often wondered how you do books when you're co-writing with someone, and yeah, that sounds like it works really well there.
It also keeps you honest, right? Well, because it's easy for someone to write about dyslexia and just tell you, you know,
have their experience.
Exactly. And that's not terrible, but it's not always useful if the reader isn't able to come to their own conclusion. And I wanted to be aware that we might have a reader that's 12 or 13 years of age. You know, it's really easy to get 75-year-old white guys that are dyslexic and successful tell you how dyslexia didn't do them any harm. Look at me. It's a lot difficult to get a 17-year-old black girl, a 21-year-old Asian girl, etc., etc. And what we did in this book is we wanted diversity across age, sex, race, to really see, well, is it any different? You know, so we interviewed a guy called the Black Farmer, who was a brilliant brand. And Wilfred emigrated from Jamaica to London, age 5. 7 brothers, lived in a 2-bedroom flat in the Midlands. And was severely poor. Now, his version of growing up with dyslexia is very different than, say, Kelly Hoppen, who's the famous interior designer for the Beckhams and various other people that we interviewed who grew up in Chelsea, and mummy and daddy were wealthy, and etc., etc. It doesn't take away the impact of dyslexia, and that's true throughout, but it does have a difference in how well they come out, and it also has a difference in, do they go down to the 50-odd% that become prisoners, or 35% that become entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That actually works well into our next question, I think. How did your neurodivergence impact your journey to where you are now? And I think the thing is, it's really interesting when we've been, just talking about what you were talking about there. But, sometimes I find that when I'm speaking, especially with other neurodivergent people, we get what we're talking about. Like, I know, for example, I could talk about our business, for example, with people who aren't neurodivergent, and they'll just be straight over their head or think, oh, yeah, that's really nice, you're helping. But then I can speak to neurodivergent people and they'll be like, oh, my God, yes. You know what I mean? Did you find, especially for you, developing and growing your career to what it is now, did you come across a lot of those problems because of your neurodivergence, and you're like, oh my God, why can't you just get this type of thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of my businesses, my first 2 businesses, sort of window cleaning and car sales, was simply just needing to be self-employed because I didn't have an education. But all of my significant businesses that I've built and sold and trade globally, etc., have all been for reasons of injustice, and that's a typical thing that goes with dyslexia, is that we have a sense of, we hate injustice, and we have a sense to try and resolve it. And so all of my businesses, and I think all of my businesses in the future, will be where I believe injustice is being served upon people where it shouldn't. And that gives me a very strong purpose and a very strong drive to fix it. So I'm fortunate, and I thank my dyslexia for that. And then obviously my ADHD means that simply I've got the energy and determination to do it. Because
when you feel
it's not an option
until you don't. Until you don't.
until you don't. Yeah, no, absolutely. It should say, there's also project. Yeah, there's times when I just dump things and go, enough's enough. I'm done with this. So I do like to keep on saying, there's a lot of people in today's world, I find, that either talk about dyslexia as a deficit, as a disability, or a superpower. And I don't typically want to buy into either of those camps, because I believe it's a mixture of the two. Yes, it has some great traits associated with it, but it's certainly an Achilles heel. Somebody asked me just last week, what's a recent event where your dyslexia has sort of been an Achilles heel for you? And they asked me just the day after. I don't, as we discussed earlier on, because of the type of car I drive, I don't use the train often.
I wouldn't if I had a Ferrari or an Aston Martin either.
But I did attempt to use the train last week to come home. And I was in town, I was on the phone to my wife, and I jumped on the train. And about 40 minutes later, I thought, bloody hell, this has taken a while. And I realized I'd gone on the complete wrong train, complete wrong direction. I was then back on the phone to my wife going, do you mind driving an hour across to pick me up, and it was.
But that is so easy to do for us.
Exactly, it's so easy to do for us, and so I don't like it when people just go, "Oh, well, dyslexia is a superpower." I just don't. If that narrative is where we end up, it's simply saying to society to keep on treating dyslexia and ADHD the way you have done for the past 100 years. And I just don't believe that that's a message that responsible people like us should be giving out.
Yeah, totally.
The correct statement is dyslexia and other forms of neurodivergence mean that you have some strengths, which can be very advantageous. But that's
exactly.
It comes with its challenges, My favorite strongman, I love strongman, is Tom Stoltman, and he's 3 times world's strongest man now. And he does go on a bit about his autism being a superpower, and I'm like, could you just tweak the message a little bit?
Yeah, it's quite typical these days. Actually, I hear it a lot. Well, I hear it every day because I'm in that circle. And you do need to be careful because you don't want to say, yeah, I'm like you, Fatima Johnson. You're sort of like can you tweak it down a little bit? You don't want to say don't do it because in some ways it adds some use.
Positive,
but only because it's positive, right? But if you speak to, so I received a letter on Friday, handwritten to my home from a chap that I met while writing a book, Harry, age 12. Now, when Harry came and sat in my garden and spoke to me for 3 hours about his dyslexia and dealing with school at the moment, there is nothing you can do to convince Harry that it's simply a superpower right now. He's right in the thick of it. And it's really not useful for people just to walk around going, don't worry, it's a superpower.
Yeah.
He is having a real rough time of it. And he wrote to me on Friday to say, just by simply sitting with me for a couple of hours in the summer, doing the interview, and this is the summer last year, he said that, his school grades have improved. He's built this level of confidence. He's got a better understanding. And that, is just amazing. But as I said, you don't get that by simply going, bang, tapping him on the back and saying, you'll be okay, mate. It's a superpower.
See, this is the thing I usually say with that. I'm like, yes, I have some great strengths, but man, the crap I've had to go through to get to this point, it's been difficult. And I'm sure we're all the same, right? When we still struggle with it now, it's not like it goes away. We may look as if we can do all these great things, but we still struggle with it every day. If it's having to read loads of stuff, or someone sends me an email and I'm like, what the hell does this email mean?
How many long emails are still in your email box because you don't want to get around to them because you open them up and you're petrified, right? You're like, I'll deal with that one later. People I work with, if you put it in 2 paragraphs, I'll deal with it. You put it in 10, I'm going to put it off forever.
Totally. So just simple as. That's how I sort of like. And
but actually, just last night,
I was
children to bed last night, and I love spending time with my children. I don't particularly like the bedtime reading stuff because I don't find reading that easy, and they're 7 and 8 now. My 7-year-old I can still read to because the books are at a reasonable level where it's just fun and story. But my 8-year-old is really, choosing quite complex books. And some of these children's writers now don't make it easy. But anyway, I said to my 8-year-old, we'd had a lovely afternoon, and I said, Emily, can I read to you tonight? And she just looked at me and put her head to one side and was like, do you have to? And I was like, no, but I would like to. And she was like, but it's a really complex book, and I think Mummy will get it better.
Crazy.
And
how'd that make you feel?
With her. Well, I laughed with her, but I'm trying to embrace my dyslexia with her. But I walked off and I thought, that's a bit crap actually, because I actually just wanted to lie in bed with her for 10 minutes. And she is right though. She's right that every 7th word or something, I have a little stumble, and that it ruins it for her. It's like, can you imagine starting the next James Bond movie and every 10th word they get slightly wrong? I mean, it'd be pretty annoying. Right?
That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. But I tell you what, you've said a little bit about education and all that, and I've seen you talk a little bit about education, in the UK And the thing is, what I've noticed with a lot of the problems, say in the UK, they're not just the UK thing, it is an Australian thing, an American thing, and all over the world type of thing. And I think, you know, especially for us as well, like we're really trying to look at higher education as well. So what do you think the issues were with school and higher education that were unhelpful for your dyslexia?
So you're right in saying, and certainly from the research we've been doing over the last 18 months, nothing's changed much from a global level or through time. It's still the same. And so I think the most unhelpful things that I experienced was the complete lack of understanding. But the belief was that I was just disruptive. So first I was thick, and then when they realized that you can't go around calling children thick, they rebranded me disruptive. And I was quite happy to play the disruptive role because it meant that I didn't have to expose my weaknesses, which the thing with dyslexia, you know you're dyslexic before anybody else knows, right? You just become a master at disguising it. So
True.
I think for then the school system just simply wanting to go, well, if you're dyslexic, we're going to call you disruptive and we're going to put you in a different area of the room because we want to concentrate those that want to learn or those that should learn. And then I would say fast forward a few 10 years or something, and what we're witnessing now is that they believe that the way they help now is to extract children from class and put them into a porta cabin in the car park or a smaller classroom. And all of the evidence behind that points to equally crap results, you know, that making people feel different is not the answer. Coming into your classroom, it's embarrassing, right? So Harry, who I spoke about earlier, 12, said that he would quite often just try and sneak back into his old class, and then 7 or 8 minutes into it, someone would come along, knock on the door and be like, Harry, come on, you know, you're not supposed to be in this classroom. They didn't quite say it, but they're going, you're down the corridor with the thick kids.
And they tend to just mash all the kids who are a bit different together, who might have completely different needs.
Where's the sense in that?
Yeah, I imagine that would be very confusing too. Because I'm not like that kid, and that kid's not like me. And
I remember when I got put into, it was called special English, right? And I just remember in special English, we were just the whole time we'd be throwing books across we were just out of control type of thing. And it felt like it was like, just get them out of the way, get them away from everyone else. And then, you know, it just didn't help. And, you know, it was different. Sorry, when did you find out you were dyslexic? Did you know that in school, by the way?
So, I mean, I always knew I was dyslexic. I didn't get formally diagnosed until I was 36.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I, like most people, did everything on earth to disguise that I was dyslexic. I made my handwriting as scruffy as possible so people didn't realize I could spell badly. I grew up when doctors had really scruffy handwriting. So having scruffy handwriting didn't mean you were thick. Not being able to spell did. So guess what I did? I just had scruffy handwriting. But I spent my whole life trying to disguise it through all of my businesses, through my presentations, through everything. And then it was only when I met my now wife, who is dyslexic too, that I had the confidence to, I like to say, I came out, you know, and it was the biggest changing moment in my life. So I think what schools could help people with right now is getting them to that come out process a lot quicker, because once you come out and say, I have dyslexia or I have ADHD or whatever it is, you then can start to build upon those foundations and build that confidence. And I think that's what I did with Harry, who we interviewed last summer. 12, I gave him the confidence to go into school and say, I have dyslexia, but I've met all these people, I've been talking to them, and I think that there's some value in it, and this is how I would like to be taught. But it's a great story on how I got diagnosed. So I sold my first business for £42 million. So I'd been reasonably successful at this stage, 36 years of age. But in the process, I decided while I was selling the business, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And I thought, I want to do an MBA. And I don't know why I wanted to do an MBA. I don't even have a GCSE. And obviously an MBA is a postgrad, not a pre-GCSE degree. But I wanted to do an MBA at one of the best business schools in the world. So I applied to Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, and LBS. And they all said no, other than LBS. And my pitch to them was, wouldn't it be a great case study for you to take someone with zero education through an MBA program? And you should do this with me based upon my past business knowledge. And I sent in loads of press articles about me and stuff like that. And I went along to LBS and I did a presentation to their admission committee. And at the end of that, they said to me, do you think you might have dyslexia? Now, I knew I had dyslexia. And when they said it, I started to sweat and I thought, shit, you know, they've found me out. And I said, no. And they said, well, would you be happy to sit a test? And I said, yes. What are you going to say? No. I said, yes. And then I got sent this portal to do this test. And I really tried to pass it as a non-dyslexic because I wanted to lie again. I wanted to get on.
Well, Kev, you tried to be like that with your autism stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, I failed my first autism test because I was masking while I was answering, just because out of habit. So they were like, "Oh, we don't think you have autism," and I succeeded in convincing them that I didn't have it. Until later, the test got a lot more, in depth, and we identified it pretty readily at that point.
Interesting, actually, and I'll tell you a story about my ADHD one too. So anyway, it came back that I had dyslexia, and I thought, oh damn. And then LBS said, but we would love to accept you anyway. So that was great. It was a real moment for LBS. Hats off to them. The reality is, after 3 months, I found it far too difficult and had to leave anyway. And lucky I did. I set up another business.
Sorry, can I
that for tens of millions?
Can I jump in on that part there for a sec? What did you find difficult about it? And also, too, do you think there could have been different ways that could have made it better for you?
That's an interesting question. And I'm not too sure I remember it that well because when I was completing it, I was simply trying to fool the system. I wasn't doing it thinking, well, how could it be done better? But that's interesting. I tell you one that I did much more recently that I can answer. That is my ADHD test. And my ADHD test, I was really, really trying to. I was like working hard. I was exhausted trying to make sure that I could fool the ADHD test.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I didn't believe that these ADHD.
Is your mindset different? But now, are you actually oh my god, I actually like being ADHD now?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But actually, I really wanted to try and just see if I could. It was just a test. It was a challenge. Why not?
Yeah.
Typical thing. And actually, what happened is I was trying so hard. And for any of your listeners or viewers that have done it, the test takes so long. But if you make an error on the test, and I can't remember what the error is, but it's like if we don't do something in a certain amount of time, or you do it too quickly, too often, the test restarts from the beginning. And this test is only supposed to take, I think it's like 30 minutes or 40 minutes, which is a long time for someone with ADHD to sit down and do this particular task. Totally. And the first time I got to 8 minutes to finish, and it went poof, restart. And I was like, damn. Sat there again, got within 7 minutes to finish, poof, restart. And eventually I turned to the assessor. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I cannot do this again. It's like, he's obviously sat there going, you've got ADHD.
Totally.
We don't even need you to complete this test again.
That's the test. That's the test.
I did end up getting through it, but it was painful. Honestly, when I left the room, I was exhausted.
Can I ask a related question on that note? As a business person, Will and I both are. How do you tend to manage task paralysis? Do you get it? Do you get a lot of that, or that's not really one of your symptoms?
No, it is, and I'm very fortunate now, right, that I employ, nearly over 1,000 people. So I what's required of me is much less. But yeah, I struggle. I struggle. I'm a big to-do list person. My to-do list is never done. I always choose the easier things first rather than the more difficult things. As we said earlier on, long emails. I mean, I leave long emails in the hope that they just go away, that it wasn't important enough, that the person just gives up. And it's a real challenge, right? But then I employ great people around me to do most of my stuff. almost all of my tasks now require a verbal yes, no, what do you think, etc., etc., and that is perfect for the way I am wired and the way I work. So once I'm off the call to you guys today, I'll have 2 or 3 verbal calls during a day, which will be, you know, hard decisions. Actually, I had one this morning, and people that work with me now know to get these things down to very concise. What do you think? But yeah, no, I mean, and I wish it wasn't. It's really tough. It's quite draining.
Yeah,
and that's
no,
the Achilles heel part of this, right? And that's why I don't, again, going back to it, it's just as, you know, yeah, I've made loads of money, yeah, I've got a good life, and all of that's lovely, but I'm also bloody exhausted through not being able to keep up with this roller coaster that I've created for myself because of all of the decisions that are required and the information inload that I'm required to take every day.
Can I ask, right? Like, some people might think, oh, success, you know, it's easier. But do you find that it's actually more difficult the more successful you get because there's so much more?
Well, a lot more is expected of me, right? So we spoke earlier on where, you know, I had to go and receive a Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of our King last year. And I've never really felt imposter syndrome until that day when I Googled it about 10 times, because I was during the day in my speech, which is pretty tough for someone with dyslexia anyway, right? It's much easier to ad lib and just get on with it.
Yeah.
But you know, this one I had to get right, and I you know, I can only describe it as you know, felt almost panic attack like during the day rehearsing in that. It was just so draining on the importance of it and how am I going to get it right, and then I should add, just a few months later, our Queen passed, and we had an event for that, and I was given the privilege of doing a talk on behalf of the King for that as well, which was, you know, again, really challenging, because it's not, you know, I'm confident now, but I didn't need either of those 2 events, and maybe I should have, but I'm confident now to open a conversation with, you know, I'm dyslexic, ADHD, colorblind, and was born poor. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about people being given the opportunity to come out, because when you stop hiding behind neurodiversity, then you can start building upon those foundations.
Yeah, totally agree. It's like it becomes easy. It's not that it becomes easier, but for me, because it was interesting. When I was in school, I thought I was the only dyslexic person out there, you know, but since I've opened up about being neurodivergent and all of that, so many people I went to school with are like, oh yeah, man, I'm this and that. I'm like, man, I never knew that, you know, and it's sort of helped a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I mean you're right. 15% of the general population are dyslexic, right? So you know, every classroom in the country will have at least a couple. So I think once we communicate that, and the playground will have, you know, up to a couple of hundred. Yeah, so I think once we start communicating that, the sooner the better.
Yeah, totally. So just moving on from that, there's good data on the prevalence of neurodivergence in entrepreneurship. Why do you think so many of us find it attractive? I did all right for a dyslexic person reading some of those big words there, right?
There's a lot of...
I was thinking, what the hell?
Sorry, the autistic person wrote the questions.
Yeah. Shit, man.
But honestly, we could see how hard you were working there too.
Totally, man. Totally.
And that's what people forget. It's really bloody challenging. So look, I mean, you know, going back to Dr. Helen Taylor's research on this, I'm yet to be convinced that it's dyslexic people that make great entrepreneurs. I think more like Dr. Helen Taylor's research is that you are either born an explorer or an exploiter. If you think back to when reading and writing wasn't invented and not relevant at all, to be an explorer would have been something you were celebrated for. The ones that left camp to find food, to find new territories, etc. But there needed to be the majority of the people to then exploit what was found. And I think it's the explorers that make great entrepreneurs. It's the explorers no need to hunt anymore. The explorers no need to go out and find new territories in the most anymore. So it's them that have diverted their passion towards entrepreneurship, creativity, You think some of the most famous inventions on earth are through explorers or that happen to be dyslexic. One thing we should remember about dyslexia is, dyslexia is a learning difficulty with writing and reading in the main. But these innovations, this technology of reading and writing was invented by us. It was invented by us humans. So it's really unusual for us to have a disability against something we invented to ourselves. And in the main, reading and writing or learning as we see it today came around from the church, and the church were just fearful of knowledge drain. When people lived to age 30, they didn't want the story of the Bible to be forgotten within a few generations. So they came up with this way to try and make us read and retain that information. Well, for an explorer who happens to be dyslexic, reading and retaining what they might perceive to be useless information is never going to work. I mean, the human brain is designed purposefully to have a brain dump every now and again of useless information to make room for new information. Well, if you say to an explorative person with dyslexia, try and retain all this information about this guy from 4,000 years ago, etc., they're like, no, I want to be, what's tomorrow? What's going on next week? Tell me about space. Tell me about space. Tell me about, how we're gonna solve the crisis, the energy crisis and stuff like that. So I think it's explorers make great entrepreneurs, and explorers happen to have a different way of thinking and a different way of learning than what we created as society, and we thought it would be fit for all.
Yeah, no, well said. I think as well, especially with neurodiversity, we'll use it as a whole here now. You hear a lot of people saying, oh, you got to go into, you're probably going to do really well if you go into business and all of that. And it's like, well, hang on. Not everyone wants to go into business. And also, too, maybe some people may not be good at business, you know what I mean? Especially around neurodivergent people. And I think the biggest thing when we were sort of looking at questions around this is, what are some strengths you think employers need to understand that we can bring to the table? So in the working environment, because, I'm still seeing people not utilizing these great strengths that we could actually bring to these workplaces.
Yeah, it's a real passion of mine, actually. So one thing I should say before I answer the question is I would implore everybody that has got a LinkedIn profile to go on and add dyslexic thinking as a skill. That was a real brainchild of Sir Richard Branson a few years ago, and through a lot of effort, he got Microsoft LinkedIn to make that skill available. So that will go to show people that I am a dyslexic thinker, and we can start to then demonstrate that it does have value associated with it for employers. Another thing that I do, and I ask other people to do, especially if you work for larger organizations, is to get anyone within your organization that is dyslexic to add it to their email signature. So I have on my email signature, expect small typos but big ideas. I'm a dyslexic thinker.
That's cool. I like that.
And because I just want it to be, I don't want people, I'm bored of me putting on a social post and someone corrected me on how it should have been written or correcting the spellings on my email. Again, we go back to dyslexics like to read too, but they want the content from it rather than the enjoyment of reading. If you can understand what I was trying to say, just accept it, right? Get on with it.
Totally. Why mess around?
Exactly.
Well, I have to admit, I'm a reformed grammar Nazi because back in the day when social media was young and stuff. But then as I learned more about dyslexia, just specifically through Will, I just stopped doing it. There's no benefit to anyone,
No, and it hurts people's feelings. Actually,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, I'm sure we've all done it, but it does. It hurts people's feelings. For me, it's about getting what I would love to see, and through the efforts of some of the work Dr. Helen Taylor and I are doing, and the book, is to get employers start for the first time ever to actively recruit for dyslexic thinkers. I think that will be the biggest changer when they can see. So these are the skills associated with dyslexic thinkers, you know, the big thinking, the problem solving, the gut feel on reactions, the creativity, and the 7 or 8 other key ones. I would like them to start to go, we believe that diversity is what makes a great leadership team. And that doesn't just mean sex, race, and age. It means the way they think also. And that would then bring those with ADHD and dyslexia into the boardrooms, into senior management teams, into creative environments, into non-creative environments, project management teams. But I would like to see a real push for purposefully going to recruit dyslexic thinkers.
Yeah, it's see, I sort of work in that area, and I think a big thing I'm seeing is the people are still just not understanding the whole concept behind it. So, for example, I was in a meeting the other week, and we're like, oh, you know, if we had dyslexic people come in, you know, you'd need this, and they're like, oh, we could never have dyslexic people here. And I'm thinking in my head, you've probably already got 15% of your workforce. You know what I mean? They're probably, and do you know what? Like in this place that I'm doing some stuff, I see people come up to me, and they because I'm the neurodiversity consultant there. You know, people are coming up to me, asking me questions. And I'm like, they're like, oh man, I don't know who else to ask. And I'm like, yeah, okay, this and that. But they're too afraid to tell their employers. So yeah, well, that's the hard part.
I mean, that's a fear, right? I mean, that's a
Totally.
real fear.
As
I said, I knew I was dyslexic my whole life. I just made every effort on earth to try and disguise it. If you've got people in your organization like that, then that's a real shame. That is a real shame.
And it depends on whether or not how they action that information, even if you do tell them. You know, I've later in my employment history, before I started working for myself, I was starting to tell employers that I was autistic. I didn't know I was ADHD yet at that point, but and they're like, okay, cool. Thank you for telling us. You know, we're a very inclusive environment here, because I work in, you know, the digital space, so they all want to be Silicon Valley. But then I slowly came to realize as I continued to job hop that didn't mean that they were making any adjustments whatsoever. And sometimes they just didn't know what adjustments to make, and I didn't know what to tell them. You know,
of course.
So yeah, and so there's a fear there, even if you're comfortable saying it, that it won't actually change anything.
Yeah, it is. There is a long way to go, but I think we're a hell of a lot closer than what we were saying. Like, I remember when I first got into neurodiversity here in Australia, there was no one talking about it. I was going to like diversity inclusion events, and I would be talking about neurodiversity, and people were like looking at me like weird. Go back, you know, fast forward to where we are now, those same people are now coming to me going, hey, Will, you were right. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like, so it's the way I see it is it's growing. It's probably not growing as fast as I would like it to grow, but we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly. I agree. But there is definitely a change. There is definitely a change, and totally. and you guys are part of that change. I am part of that change.
Totally.
And every single person that's logged on and watching this now is part of that change. So
totally.
This is a brilliant thing.
And I think this actually goes in well to the next question. Why is it important for neurodivergent leaders in particular to be open about both their struggles and their strengths? Now, a big thing, we actually spoke about this in our last podcast. There's some really big entrepreneurs here in Australia who have multi-billion-dollar tech companies, and I know for a fact that they are dyslexic, but they don't want to talk about it out of, you know, this fear type of thing, you know, where, you know, it's those people are so key to growing this to where it can be. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's vastly important, and it doesn't just need to be the Richard Bransons, the Keira Knightleys, and those big public figures who are doing a brilliant job at it, by the way. And we should all take our hats off to them for that. But I just did a podcast for SAP, the big
the tech company,
business. Yeah. And you got, I think, 40,000 employees across the world, and I was like, well, have you ever sat down with the exec board to see if any of them are dyslexic? And do you know the power of one of them changing their email signature to say dyslexic thinker, expect small typos, but big ideas, would have filtering throughout the entire organization? So these changes don't need to be huge. We're not asking everybody to show all of their vulnerabilities of what they've been through like they have in my book, but they could simply upgrade their LinkedIn profile or update their email signature. But I think it's really important. And hats off to those that have driven I'm on this. I get on this train a bit later than, say, Richard Branson, who's been now doing this for 4 or 5 years. But once people know that successful people, so that people can be successful and neurodivergent also, then they're more likely to. I'm a strong believer, I know I keep on saying this, but the sooner we get people to come out, and I like using that term, but the sooner we get people to come out, the better their life will be.
Totally.
And we can do that simply by communicating.
Yep. I totally agree. And this is it. I think, it's the saying, it takes a tribe to build a village.
Yeah.
Is that the saying?
Yeah. Or a village to raise a child, or something like that.
Something like that. So we get what we're talking about, right? But it does, and that is the very successful people and the people still struggling and everyone in between there. I think that plays such a huge role. And when people, and talking about some of the people we're sort of really trying to encourage to come forward, but they haven't, they're worried about being seen as the poster child and stuff like that. And it's like, you don't need to be that. And you said it before, it could be some small things, like maybe your company is doing something that helps this, or these little things make a huge difference. You don't need to be the poster child of dyslexia, for example.
And I do think, given that we're involved in trying to help educators, better support students and whatnot, that I think you would find a pretty common thread throughout that with regards to what their school experience was like. And I think that would bring some attention to what really needs to start to change to help these poor kids who are just not, they're trying to mash them through this cookie cutter system that just does not serve them at all and teaches them that they're less than,
Well, actually, on that subject, I get invited to do quite a lot of speeches and talks and various like that, and I don't do many, but I've been invited back to my school a couple of times, which I have done, but always based upon look at this successful entrepreneur. And actually, if you look at all of the speakers at my children's schools, they're sort of, look at this gold medalist, look at this, look at that. Actually, what I would like to see, and maybe it's something in the work that you guys are doing with the education system, is them to purposely start looking for those neurodivergent people to come back and tell their stories. They don't have to have gone on to be an Olympic gold medal. They just had to have gone on to have had a life that wasn't so utterly affected by their dyslexia or their ADHD or whatever else they may have, because that shows real success to these younger people. So I would like to see, and I said this earlier on, and we made sure we achieved it in the book, which is we didn't just want a bunch of 75-year-old white millionaires tell you that dyslexia will be okay. So we've got people that are just at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey. There's a girl called Chef Philly who just won MasterChef here in the UK. She's right at the beginning of her journey, but she talks about, she knew she was dyslexic. She kept on going home to her Indian family saying, I think I'm dyslexic. Now, the Indian community placed such a high value on education that they just kept telling her to stop being silly and work.
Yeah, it's almost frowned upon over there.
Exactly. So I want to see more people like Chef Philly be given the stage to tell people about her dyslexia, because actually getting me might be just like getting Kelly Hoppen, or getting Sir Charles Dunstan might just be getting like Richard Branson. We all play a part, but let's not take away the value that you will get from everyday people telling their stories too.
Do you know what, right? I actually went and approached my old school because I failed school, and I said, look, I've done all this, you know. They didn't want a bar of it. They didn't want me
they're
there,
scared.
did they? Yeah, they
scared.
are.
Yeah.
You know, and I think as well, because I approached them, I said, look, I want to go in there and I want to say, you know, if you don't do well in school, and that's a big thing what we're trying to do with Neurodiversity Academy. If you haven't done well in school, that's not the end of it. There's so many pathways you can take, but they didn't want to borrow that because, you know, I went to a private school. Private schools are big business, and it's all about grades and marks and all that. So if you've got someone going if you've got someone going in there going, hey, it's all right if you don't get the best mark, they frown upon it. Do you know what I mean? But it's true. Like, the thing is, like, I went through years of drug and alcohol abuse because I could have just quit, you know, and given up altogether. But, you know, I was able to, you know, get through that. But that was 10 years of my life that I could have been on the right track. You know, where is the people helping these people? But hey, Jamie, we're getting to the end here now. Thank you so much for coming.
Just on that, sorry, because I think it's a real important one that I wouldn't like you just to go without me giving you my thoughts on that. The links between drug and alcohol abuse and dyslexia and ADHD are real. They are real. And the links between sleep disorders and the two are real too. And a lot of people just start drinking to enable their mind to calm down to sleep, and it gets worse and worse. I have suffered with that too, and most of the other dyslexics that I've spoken to have had a moment.
I was the same. Sleeping
so I think it's
typical.
Yeah, so I want, and again, so that's why I hate to keep banging on about this, but if you do hear just someone constantly going around saying it's a superpower, give them a little tug of the arm and tell them just to be a bit careful, because it really does. It is an Achilles heel too, and we don't want the world to go, well, if it's a superpower, let's just continue as is.
Can I say on that superpower thing, I have done that before, and then, man, there's almost a whole gang of superpower, like, people will come and attack you. Like, seriously, like, social media will attack you if you're like, nah, it's not a superpower. I've been like, I have had things like, oh my God, it's just like, oh my God.
Well, I'm really standing, I'm pushing against the tide on this a little bit at the moment, because a lot of the dyslexic community here in the UK are very much in the superpower camp, and but you know, I think we owe it to us in this environment. The three of us and all of your viewers are here for a reason. We owe it to ourselves and each other to try and not make this as difficult as it was for us for the next generation. And to do that, you cannot rebrand it as being a superpower.
Totally. Yeah. Sorry, Photon John, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just going to say, we're not here to fluff things up. You know, we're here to have conversations and normalize those conversations and just talk reality, you know.
We're not going to bullshit in simple terms, hey? You know what I mean? But hey, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on. It's been so interesting and just it's been really cool. So, you know, if people want to connect with, say, yourself or buy your book, all of that type of stuff, where's the best place to find you, get your book, all of that type of stuff?
Well, brilliant. Thank you. So the book's available on Amazon in all formats around the world. It's available for pre-order now. The official release date's on the 12th of September. So when, you know, it'll get to people ASAP. To connect to me, I only use LinkedIn, but you can connect with me on LinkedIn or go to my website, jamiewaller.co.uk, and connect with me there. I should say that if there's anybody that's neurodivergent that simply cannot afford a copy of the book, reach out to me and I will get you one for free in whatever format you like to consume your media in.
Yeah, that's a legend, mate. Well, thank you so much. Hey, sorry. Also, by the way, what's the book version when it's getting read back to? What's that called again?
The audiobook.
Audiobook. Is it in an audiobook?
Yeah, it's in audio. Yeah,
Oh,
so all
awesome.
formats, all
Yeah,
available now.
cool. Because when I released my book all those years ago, yeah, I was sort of like, oh my God, I've wrote a book for dyslexic people, but I can't afford to get it in audio.
Well, one thing I should say, well, is an early copy here, that all of the text is written in dyslexic-friendly text. The paragraph
cool.
spacing, we spent a few months really trying to make this as easy to read as possible too, if you still do like a hard copy or a Kindle version. But yeah, audio book.
No, all good. So the Dyslexic Edge, correct?
Correct. The Dyslexic Edge.
So definitely check out the Dyslexic Edge. Awesome stuff there. Look, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no problem. Photon John, what about yourself? You got anything else before we close off?
No, just thank you again. That was an amazing conversation. I wouldn't mind extending it sometime in the future.
Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much. And for all of our listeners, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined with my main man, Photon John, and this is Neurodivergent Mates. Till next time.